Hey everyone, we are doing a workshop on blogging and podcasting today. I'm really excited about these two subjects because they've just been giving me so much joy the last few years. I also have an MA in creative media, and for some reason, I've never really made that connection, which sounds really odd, but I'm so grateful for my education. Like I had a grant from the German government to do this MA, and then I left university and I was like, I don't know what just happened or like what I've taken from this really. But now I'm really connecting the dots and things are coming together. So I'm super happy and excited to help other people create their own media. And my intention today is to give you an overview of what's available and possible and to kind of demystify the technical steps a little bit, and also just to give you a pep talk on creating something that maybe you are a little bit intimidated about at this point. So I have a presentation which I'm going to start in a second, and it has a ton of like practical information, but also a lot of questions on it. So you will receive that tomorrow with the replay, by which I mean you don't necessarily have to take notes if you don't want to, but you can, of course. But all this, you'll get the presentation as well. Okay, let me start. DIY media, blogging, and podcasting. So, obviously, welcome. I'm going to share who I am in a minute for those that are here for the first time. If you like, you can share your name, where you are in the world, and what your business is about in the chat box, just so that we can all get a feeling for who's in the room. I'm not going to read those out, but I will read along, and it just feels nice. Feel free to share your website or your Instagram handle as well. So I encourage self-promotion in these spaces and connection in whatever way feels good for you. My name is Yarrow. As you probably know, I run two businesses. One is called Yarrow Digital, which is all about web design and online marketing, and the other is called Daydream Rules, which grew out of my personal blog that I started many years ago, and which is all about self-care and ritual and writing and herbalism and the tarot and many things I care about. So I've been running workshops for almost 2 years now. I last year have run over 25 of them for free, which I really loved. It was an amazing way for me to build community and get a feeling for what people are struggling with and what they want to learn more about. I'm now asking people to make a small Patreon pledge to participate, which I'm kind of experimenting with. I loved the openness last year, and I also love the support now of having a more intimate space and feeling the same faces showing up, and also for me to be able to spend a little bit more time and energy on offering these. So yeah, I'm just sharing my process with that. It's like an ongoing thing. Okay, no one has used the chat box yet. That's cool. It's okay to be shy, but if you want to share, you're welcome anytime. Yeah, so this workshop is part of a series on DIY media. For 2 weeks ago, I ran a workshop on content planning and developing a long-term content strategy. So if you want to revisit that, that's in the recording section of the DIY school on Mighty Networks. If you're not sure where to find that, let me know. But all the replays of all the workshops I've run in the past year are in there. So there's a ton of information there. There's also a lot more information on social media and other bits. So if you feel in this workshop that there's areas that you would like to expand on more, then this might be a great place to check out. Okay, so I want to begin by talking about why we would want to create our own media. And obviously, I love seeing everyone share. Hi. Yeah, that's cool. No videos, fine. So, obviously you'll have your own reasons, and I would really encourage you to maybe after the session or whenever you have time this week, write about that a little bit to see what's coming up for you. Like, why did you come to this workshop? What is your current relationship to creating your own media? How are you experiencing social media, and how is that related to the bigger vision of your business and what you're creating? But for me, one key aspect is independence from social media. I think I wouldn't have a business without social media, and I have intense gratitude for so many things that it has brought into my life, because in the beginning it was really the easiest way to play and reach people and express myself and learn about things that I want to learn about. But I'm also noticing that it's stressful to deal with these ever-changing algorithms. There are limitations around what I can say or express on social media. And also, I think there are unwritten social media rules in different spaces that are sometimes difficult to navigate. So even if sometimes it can feel very authentic to sit down and write something, I do notice that I just feel more myself on my podcast or on my blog, for example, than I do on Instagram. So there's more of a sense of freedom in expression, maybe not total freedom because there is still a world, but there are small things like nudity, for example. You can be as naked as you want on your own blog, which is cool, and you really can't do that on your Instagram account, for example. You can have deeper conversations with people. That's another really key thing for me. I feel like I have met amazing people on Instagram and had some really beautiful, inspiring conversations. But in many ways, they've just felt more like a spark rather than the depth and the focus and the intensity that I sometimes really want. I think creating our own media also means more space for telling stories and authenticity, or even just like space for yourself to see what that means, because it has become such a buzzword. And I just think it's really hard. And I think creating your own little bubble where you can express yourself is at least a really positive step to kind of exploring what authenticity can mean. It's great, obviously, for building an audience, which can support your business in creative ways. And I think this kind of DIY aspect of it also has something very rehumanizing in how we trade with each other. So whereas on social media, I feel like growing a business traditionally is sometimes more about appearing great and making things look a certain way. Obviously, you want to promote something, and all of that is valid. You know, that's just at the moment what it takes in a way to grow a business. But I think the more we own our own media, the more we can be critical of those dynamics. And I think there is something actually really empowering in seeing a business owner doing something imperfectly, if that makes sense. So I hear from people a lot, for example, that say, I bought this thing from you actually because you weren't just perfect looking on Instagram, but because you were really telling what was going on for you in a way, even if it was sometimes messy, but because that was relatable to me, it just had more meaning to me as well. I hope that makes sense. I'm going to check on the chat box very quickly, just in case I missed anything excited, but I feel like, cool. Thank you for sharing. Really good point, sharing pronouns. I'm sorry I have not mentioned this in the beginning, but that's great. Yes, algorithm, wanting deeper connection. Yeah, great, awesome. Okay. So the next thing I wanted to kind of touch on is working with resistance, which I think comes up for everyone in lots of different ways. I think my dog is distracting me a bit by trying to lick my knee. um, so, you've already taken a really big step in showing up for this, and maybe you've been wanting to create a podcast for a while or a blog. And I think at this stage, it might be helpful to think about what kind of resistance you're working with. It could be things like time and overwhelm or energy. Maybe you feel like you're nervous around setting the tech up correctly, or maybe you feel like you don't have enough of an audience yet to kind of hit the ground running, whatever that might mean. So at this point, I just want to kind of invite everyone to think about what you're resisting and how that's feeling in your body, maybe even want to share in the chat box. And then I want to touch on a couple of things that I find helpful in like working with that. So the first thing is creating a safe container, which can look lots of different ways. So I, for example, started blogging as a teenager, about 17 years ago. And I often, throughout the years, had several private blogs. So those were spaces that no one knew or could connect with me as a person in any way. And it was just like a way of getting into the habit of documenting thoughts and life and creating private spaces for myself. I had so many Tumblr accounts, like, and MySpace, and I had like an early WordPress account, all that kind of stuff. And that felt really useful. Another tool I really like is using morning pages as practice. I personally like the book The Artist's Way by Julia Cameron. I think the language isn't necessarily for everyone, but as a tool, writing morning pages I think can be really helpful. And then also your diary or your journal kind of becomes this private space in which you get to practice expressing yourself for yourself first before you're kind of opening up to an audience. Just gonna check on the checkbox to say, yeah. Life journal, yes. Cool, yeah. Just nodding along here. The other thing I would invite you to think about, we have already touched on that in the last workshop, but you can never cover this enough, is drawing boundaries around privacy and vulnerability. So I think a lot of people, like you just said, feel like they have a lot to share, and like really do. You know, this is not just a feeling. Clearly you have a lot to share. But there's like sometimes some nervousness around what is okay to share, what do I actually want to share, where's the boundary, like how much of myself do I want to or need to show in order to be relatable. And so what I do about twice a year is to kind of sit down and think about the stories and the storylines and arcs in my life, or the themes that are appearing, and I'm deciding which of those I'm sharing and which I'm sharing not. So for example, I never, like, it's funny because sometimes friends talk to me and they really get this impression that they know so much by following me on Instagram from my life. And I do this myself. Like a couple of days ago, I spoke to a friend about a friend that I have known in Berlin when I lived there like 5 to 7 years ago. And I'm not in touch with this person anymore, but I'm following her Instagram account. And so I know a lot of what's going on in her life. And it creates this illusion of like this intimacy and you know what's going on. So anyway, where I'm going with this is that I often hear from friends that they think they know what's happening in my life. And in a way that's true, you know, like I'm not lying on Instagram, and a lot of that is very real for me and it's often happening in the moment. But I'm also very clearly around my boundaries. So for example, I never talk about dating on Instagram, and I don't really talk about my finances very much, like I think hardly ever. And those two areas I just feel like, first of all, they're my own. I don't think necessarily that it's helpful for me to share about them, or it's, you know, it's just not something that I desire to do at the moment. And also I'm allowing myself spaces to figure my shit out without being watched, if that makes sense. So I think especially in dating for me, there always needs to be a lot of buffer. And I'm definitely sharing about romantic thoughts or relationships in abstract ways. And I think, you know, obviously that's an important part of my life. And it comes up in the podcast as well. But I would never say this is an experience I've just had. This is what's going on for me right now, because I think it's also about protecting the privacy of people involved. So with this long waffle in the last 5 minutes, what I'm trying to say is have a think about the themes and the things that you're keeping to yourself, that you're not sharing in any kind of media that you're creating. And I think that might be interesting to do also around identities. So many of us have several marginalized identities. I'm sharing some of mine very openly, and there are also some that I haven't named publicly yet. And I'm in the process of doing that eventually, because I think it's powerful, but it's also really vulnerable. And I have also made not so great experiences with that. I think there can be stuff around tokenism, or it can sometimes happen that you're sharing something that still feels very raw for you, and you're inviting people to identify with that in a way that makes them feel connected to you in a way that maybe isn't fully appropriate. So I'm sorry, that sounds very abstract. I think that's really something that we all kind of have to navigate in our own way. I'm just naming that that can happen, and it's something good to think about. And then another tool I think that's great to work with resistance is thinking about other people's work that you enjoy and really celebrating their imperfections. So if, for example, you feel like you don't know audio editing enough at this stage to bring out a podcast. Listen to some of my earlier episodes or even the more recent one, and you'll notice some small glitches in the audio that I just haven't had the time or energy to really fix, and you probably still enjoyed my podcast, so that's great. But really kind of go deep into that. I know I listen to a ton of podcasts that doesn't have like an audio intro with like music, for example, and like I still get so much out of them. It's really no problem at all. So, and I think we're often so much more generous with other people than we are with ourselves, which is such a shame. Yeah. Cool. Yeah. Cool. Okay, great. um, The next thing I would like to invite you to think about is choosing the right spaces to pour energy into. So I think when you're creating a new project or a business or anything that you kind of want to share with the world, there can be this pressure to need to be everywhere all the time. So the questions that I would consider are, what kind of media do you find easiest to create? Is it audio or writing, maybe videos or images? And to give yourself a little bit of time to experiment with that. So Instagram is a great example for a platform where you combine lots of different things. So you can create audios, well, you can, and then you have to layer them with an image, but it's a different story. But you can also create videos, you can write fairly long posts, you can really express yourself through images. And it might be really helpful to get a feeling for which kind of media you find easiest to create. I started podcasting 3 years ago, and before that, I loved writing and photography so much. So I was writing poetry in my 20s. I participated in a lot of photography projects and took that really seriously. Like, it was a big part of my life. And then suddenly, I was like, don't want to write anymore. And I really was like, this is it. I'm just not excited about it anymore. I'm going to start podcasting now. And I'm now returning to writing. But what I'm trying to say is that I really feel it's been so helpful to just follow what was easy to do at any given point in time. And it doesn't have to be any particular media that doesn't feel good right now. Another good question is like, where are folks that you want to reach? My feeling is that most people that will come to this workshop or into my kind of work offer something that is in some way personal, and that is maybe about storytelling or challenging things, thinking critically. And so I really think that spaces in which we can have deeper conversations are more powerful than things that just look pretty, for example. And so, that could also be a YouTube channel if video is actually easier for you, or it could be a podcast, or it could be a blog. But I think that for these kinds of businesses or projects, there are definitely limitations on platforms like Pinterest or Instagram, where people have a different kind of attention span and are looking for a different kind of thing or dialogue in how they're engaging with things. So something, for example, that feels really powerful for me is remembering that if someone listens, this commitment of like, on a journey on a train or in a car or waiting somewhere, to listen to an hour of me talking to someone else is so much bigger and like more beautiful than someone just scrolling through their feed and like liking something. And it's mutual. Like, I obviously, in having this conversation, also offer so much more to this person. And then finally, what is sustainable for you to commit to? So really to remember that I'm going to throw all these possibly exciting ideas at you, and maybe you're like, I want a blog and I need a YouTube channel and a podcast, but really to think about what is easy right now and what is going to be a sustainable commitment for you to make. And as you're kind of researching and thinking about other media producers that you like, to remember that it does never have to be that particular pace. There is something really beautiful in consistency and managing expectations, and maybe saying like, I'm going to bring you a new episode every fortnight, or you're going to hear from me every month. But at the end of the day, the powerful thing in creating your own media is also that you make the rules, and it has to be sustainable for you first before anything else. I'm going to have a drink. Oh my God, it's so hot. Does that all make sense so far? Do you have any questions? I'm going to check on the. Yeah. content creation, yeah, me too, feels that, yeah, on Instagram there's a need sometimes to make it look very polished. Sustainable commitment is big, yeah. So what I bring to fan fiction. Yeah, that's a really good idea. I would love to engage more with fan fiction. This is a silly side story, but I have a terrible habit of only reading non-fiction books. So this year alone, I probably have read, I'm reading about trauma all the time, like all the time. And God, what else? There's a book like the Heart of Trauma, um, feminist trauma resolution, all that. And I'm like, oh man, do I have any joy in my life? So this weekend I read a book called Everything I Know About Love, which is just a silly memoir about being in London. Doesn't have a ton of meaning for me, but I was like, my brain was like, whoa, this is other world. So I think a really important part of content creation, which is why I'm so glad you brought this up, is actually also really curating the content and the media that we are consuming and engaging with in meaningful ways. Because I think our minds can so easily get cluttered, and that's a space in which we really easily become stuck and overwhelmed and not very creative. So I'm gonna officially commit to reading more fiction and fan fiction, and I'm very excited. Yeah, so I want to start by going into the more practical stuff and talking about why I love blogging so much. I think blogging is a really great space for long form writing, and you can add videos and audio materials. So most blogs are pretty flexible in that you can write, but you could also add in an embedded video or an audio or images into your blog post, which is cool. And it's funny, like, what does long form reading mean? I think has really changed in the last few years, especially since we have Twitter, because now everything that's more than like 140 characters is long form. But well, I will let you think about what long form means for you, but it can mean anything because it's your blog, it's your rules. That's really cool. You can also visually create a space you really love to be in. So this is huge for me. I was always, when I was mainly on Tumblr, I spent hours creating the right layout and like looking at different templates. And it's really important to me to create an aesthetic that felt like I was arriving in my own space in a way. Because that motivated me more to actually be there and to create more stuff and write more. And so having your own blog, ideally, I think, should feel like logging on is like opening your own diary, except that's only the part that you want to share with the world, not in like an intrusive way, but it can feel really great. It's also a beautiful way to build an audience and document your journey. So even those things to me feel slightly separate, because you can build an audience and be in this creative dialogue with people. And I think it really isn't just about I'm sharing this one too many thing and now you're going to buy something from me. I think there also many ways in which we are opening ourselves up to be in creative dialogue, especially if we're also inviting people to comment. So we'll talk about different blogging podcast platforms in a minute, but I would really encourage you to think about opening the comments on whatever you're creating to really hear what's coming up for people as you're sharing, if you dare to do that. And then documenting the journey. So if you are feeling resistance around like, is anyone going to read this, or does it even matter? There's something really powerful and beautiful in just documenting your own journey and having that for yourself to look back to. I'll share something slightly embarrassing. I have a private Instagram for my nudes, and I have a very small group of friends that I'm inviting to follow that. And I now have years and years of nudes to look back to that no one knows about. And it gives me so much joy. Like I can see how I was relating to my body at different points in my life, in different environments, in different relationships. And that's really quite cool. And like, I really don't need anyone beyond the handful of people that is on that account to see that, but it's great for me. And then of course you can draw attention to your offerings as well. Hell yes, for safe places for nudity. Yeah, it's great, very important. So I want to talk a little bit about the practical steps of setting a blog up, and we'll do the same with podcasting. And I think I'm sharing these slides and sending those to you tomorrow really to kind of demystify what it takes, because it probably is much easier than you think. So the first step, I think, is setting an intention and deciding on a name, remembering that both are not permanent. You can always change your mind and it's no one's business. You don't have to justify that. And then deciding on a platform. I would usually recommend WordPress, but there's a ton of other ones. And I think at the end of the day, the most important thing is that you really do it and that you're not letting the tech stop you. So if you can make it happen, choose WordPress. There's a lot of benefit to that if you want to grow a business and extend the functionality of your website in some ways. But if not, then go with whatever is easiest. You can get started with a logo and branding, and maybe it's just me as a design person that feels like that's an important step. But I think for me to visually identify with a project and get in that headspace, I need to create some kind of graphic. Canva.com is a great tool for getting started, and I have a free little course that kind of gives you an introduction to Canva and really tells you everything that you need to know to create a little logo. I'm going to check on the chat box. Oh, no, newts. Maybe I'm mispronouncing that. That's funny. Okay, the Canva course changed my life. Oh, that's great. That's wonderful. I need to update that, actually. I think it has a little bit aged now, and I think Canva has a lot more new functionality. But that's so great to learn. Great, thank you. Then you want to think about promoting it. So if you decide to share it, you want to think about how you want to promote it. And I think all that is really is making a list of steps that you're going to take each time you have a new blog post. So for me, this would be posting on Instagram, which automatically cross-posts to Pinterest and Facebook, adding it to my next newsletter, maybe talking about it on an Instagram Live. That's pretty much it at the moment. Yeah. The same process is happening for a podcast. I would recommend, as soon as you start a blog, to also set a newsletter up, because there's just a lot of power in being able to connect with people directly rather than relying on social media for reasons we've been into, you know. I think there's something really beautiful if someone invites you into their inbox. I've had many interesting conversations with people this year about the ethics of freebies. And if I'm really honest, I'm still undecided about it. Some people say that it is inherently slightly dishonest to offer a freebie in exchange for an email address, because in a way you're wanting to market to this person and it makes it look more like you're offering something for free, but actually you might want to promote to them. I don't feel that way. I think actually freebies, or generally creating content for free, which is included in podcasting and blogging, I think is a really beautiful way to serve a ton of people and share what you know for free, and then working with a smaller number of people for whom it is right to work with you at the time and to pay you in some way. But I'll leave you to think about that yourself. There's some background sound. I'm gonna see if I need to mute one of you. Okay, hi, there's a new person. Just to say really quickly, I've muted you just for the background noise. You're super welcome here. I'm just kind of halfway through the presentation, but you haven't missed a ton yet, and you will also receive the replay tomorrow, as well as the presentation slides for the stuff that you missed. And you're welcome to unmute yourself or use the chat box to ask questions anytime. Oh, it's funny. Hi. Great, cool. And then finally, you might want to create a content plan. So this is totally up to you. You might be the kind of person that's just like, I've created a blog, I've set everything up, this was the first step, I'm going to rest for now. But maybe you are the kind of person that's like, no, I want to commit to, you know, getting a new blog post out fortnightly and map the next 3 months out. And if you are that kind of person, I think revisiting the last workshop might be useful, in which I'm sharing an Excel sheet that you can customize in your own way. And I'm also sharing a lot of tools that I find helpful around like mapping out what kind of content you actually want to produce or create. Produce doesn't sound horrible. Create is better. Yeah. I want to share a few more creative ways to grow your blog, because I think maybe in most conventionally we're thinking about as one kind of blog post, but I think there's actually so many different ways that you can work with a blog. You can have a written interview series if you are someone who's like flirting with a podcast, but you don't feel quite ready yet, but you want to have conversations with people. Do written interviews. I have done a few of those with people that felt like they didn't want to be on my podcast, but they still wanted to be sharing something. So I just sent them my questions, and that was really cool and interesting as well. Another cool thing to do, I think, is how-to guides and answers to common questions. And with that, I really would encourage you to kind of try to be in beginner's mind, because I think if we care about something enough to create a business around it, it's super easy to forget that we were also at a place once where we knew nothing about this, and where even the smaller things that we now know and think about every day were totally new and super exciting to us. So this, I think, is about talking to people, seeing what they want to know about. In the first few years of my business, I spent so much time in Facebook groups, just, like I would be part of like business groups with 20,000 people in them. And I would go in and type WordPress into the search bar. And then I would just see all the questions around WordPress that people had. And I would go and answer them. And sometimes if they were pretty big questions, or if I had seen them more often, I would create a blog post answering this question. So then I could share that. And it was a great way to come up with good content, and also just get people to notice that I could help them with my stuff. You've been mulling over creating a content plan and feeling like maybe a series that I can complete, then post out weekly or fortnightly once they're all done might work for me. Yeah, that's a really good point, actually. I'm so glad that you brought this up, because I think the other thing that might be helpful to decide on is how much content you want to create in advance before you bring anything out. So some people say, I want to have a year of content created before I'm going to start the podcast. At the moment, I have about 3 to 7 interviews recorded at any point in time that are not yet out, if that makes sense. I have had many times also where I had nothing, and I was approaching people just whenever I had time and energy, and were like, hey, do you have time next week? Could I interview you? And then it kind of fell into place. And whenever I then had time to edit, I would bring the episode out, or I would in between also do solo episodes, which are also always less time consuming to make. But no worries, funny. But yeah, I think again that's about what you're comfortable with and whether you feel you need to commit to a certain thing. So with the Dating Rules was my first podcast, which I started just because I didn't want to write anymore. And in the very beginning, I made a list of different solo episodes that I wanted to record. I started with the first one and I brought that out right away. And then 3 weeks later, I had time to record the next and I brought that out. And then sometimes it took me 2 months to get to the next one. So obviously that wasn't an effective way of growing a podcast, and I didn't have a ton of momentum that first year. That really came when I was more consistent and more organized around my structures and systems. But I don't think that it was a bad way of starting, because I started, and I gave myself some space to experiment and see what I was actually able to do. I learned about editing in that time, and I grew my confidence in approaching people for interviews, which I just didn't have right away. So yeah. Okay. Another interesting thing I think that's often overlooked is background stories for product creation. So I was thinking specifically here about physical products, but it could be anything really. I think people are so much more open to actually hearing about the background process of a business that we think. I think there's often this idea that we should only present this finalized product and then ask people to buy it. But actually, especially with like herbalism, I always love seeing what people are doing in their gardens, how long it takes to make a balm or a tincture. And so I think telling some background stories is really cool. Obviously, personal stories and reflections, that's probably the common thing that people think about. I also really like reviews. So that could be books or projects or, whatever, anything. And with that also, I think people sometimes feel like what they care about is so niche, no one else would care about it, but that's often not true. I think being niche is really awesome. And then finally, creative collaboration. So, with that, it could be anything from like line poems that you exchange with the people, or it could be a photo documentary that we've done with someone else. So yeah, I just wanted to add that there because I think there's lots that we easily overlook there as well. You're here because you want to start. That's great. Awesome. Okay. So in praise of podcasting, actually, does anyone have questions about blogging so far? Well, okay, maybe there's more later. I love podcasting because I love having conversations. I'm a really hardcore introvert in real life, but I also want to talk to people, and it just feels so nice to be able to be in my own space with all my comfort elements, with like my dog is here and I have my special drink and I don't have to leave the house. I can wear whatever I want. So it really enables me to have the conversations that I want to have. I really want to say that you get used to hearing your own voice. Like that's something that I hear a lot from people of like, oh, I have to edit and listen to myself. I think it took me like 2 minutes, 2 weeks of like feeling really awkward about that, and then it was done. Podcasting might be easier than writing, depending on what your creative flow is. It's a really fast growing platform, which actually looking at this now, I think that's a too broad a statement to make. I think what I'm trying to say with that is that in my experience, energetically, and this is without numbers, so I'm really sorry if that's not really your jam, but for me, it feels like I have grown an audience that is engaged and excited about what I'm saying so much faster by podcasting than being on any social media platform, because it's a different space where you get to share so much more, and it's a completely different way of engaging with other people. So I do think that that podcasting as a whole, as an industry, is also has an exciting upward trend. I think more and more people are podcasting. I 100% think that there's so much more space for tons of other people to podcast. I think also culturally maybe, but that might be just me and I haven't fully formed these thoughts, but I think we're often so overwhelmed by multimedia approaches, by like all these images we look at on Instagram and the videos and the audios and like this intense engagement, that there's something very beautiful of like just sitting with a podcast and doing this one thing. I think it fits very beautifully into our lives, or at least for me. Like other people's podcasts are by far the thing that I engage with the most. So I read books. That's the second biggest thing. I don't watch any films. Like I watch maybe like 2 films a month, maybe just one actually. And so podcasts, actually, I feel I can take on my walks, I can take on my travel, and I just don't feel overwhelmed by them in the same way I sometimes feel overwhelmed by TV. Like I don't have one, but now I'm at my mom's house, and I just like the ads in between, for example, I'm like, oh, that's so different in a way. So I think that is something that's probably true for a lot of people. You also own your content in a way, so you're going to have to choose a host, and we'll talk about that in a minute, but you just have much more ownership around the audio files that you could create. You can store them on your own computer, you can back them up, you can pretty much say whatever you want. I think iTunes definitely has rules. You probably have to confirm if you have adult content, and that can bring other issues such as like how can you promote this on Patreon and social media, but technically there's definitely more freedom in what you can say on your own podcast. And I think it creates a much deeper connection with your audience. Like I said, I think when I compare my experience of what people are offering or the businesses that they're creating to someone that I only know from Instagram, from like the images and text, or someone that I've listened to their voice a dozen of times, it's like a completely different relationship, I think, to how I'm relating to their creative work in the world. Does adult content include swearing? No, I swear all the time. I've never been flagged for adult content. It's a good question though. I also always say at the beginning of interviewing people of like, this is an all emotion podcast. You can be angry and sad, and swearing is allowed. So I'm pretty sure it's mainly about sex and nudity, but you'd have to look it up. I think so, like you create your audio file and then you host it on something like SoundCloud, and then you create an RSS feed, and that goes into iTunes or Stitcher, and those platforms will have their own rules for what is adult content and what isn't. I would think that they also have rules about hate speech, but I'm not totally sure. And but if you like, you can still host your audio file on your own WordPress site, and then you can do whatever you want, and you're totally free. Freedom. Okay, so this is maybe the slide I'm most excited about. Again, stop me if you have more questions or if anything isn't making sense. But I'm basically outlining the steps, it's just 6 of them, to start a podcast, because I'm just 100% sure it's easier than you think. And I just so want you to feel confident to do this if you want to do this. So the first step is you want to set an intention and decide on a name and tagline. And again, you want to remind yourself that this can totally change. So nothing is set in stone here, but you just have to start somewhere. I have not changed the names of my podcast, but I've changed the descriptions and blurbs so many times, and like, no one cares. It's totally fine. The next step is you want to decide on where you're hosting your audio files. I've decided SoundCloud for no particular reason. It's just one of those things. If you start there, then that's just where you are. But I would research that. It won't be free. I will say that. That's sad. Unless you only want to host it on your WordPress site. So if you just want to upload your audio, your sound files to WordPress, you can do that for free. But if you want people to be able to listen to through any app, you're gonna need hosting. SoundCloud costs $5 a month. That's why I'm paying, but there might be cheaper ones. The next step is you want to get familiar with some kind of audio editing software like Audacity. Actually, you can skip that step though if you really need to. So I'm going to tell you what my editing process is. It's not fancy. So I record an audio file on Zoom in this software that we're in right now. So I'm recording people in this way where I can also see them. And then afterwards, I'm downloading the audio file, which is usually an hour long. And then I record a custom intro for each of my episodes. So in the beginning, I had one intro for all of them. But I'm now offering so many different things, and I want to kind of let people know about stuff in real time. So in the last couple of episodes, for example, I was announcing this workshop series, and I will just talk whatever is currently the thing. And that's about 2 or 3 minutes long. And then on Fiverr.com for $20, I think, I bought this tiny 3-minute guitar riff that someone probably took 5 minutes to make. And that is, I put it in a search bar on Fiverr, and then there was a person with a guitar, and I was just like, I want something really soft and simple that kind of matches my voice for my podcast intro. And so then I'm going into Audacity, and I'm playing the guitar sound behind my intro voice, and I'm merging those two things together. So then I have 2 files, the audio and the main part, and then I use audio-joiner.com to merge these 2 together, and then I upload this to SoundCloud. So I hardly ever actually go into the big interview and edit anything out or change anything about the sound. There were 1 or 2 cases where I was really stuck, like there was a particular background sound consistently throughout the recording that I didn't know how to remove. And then again, I contacted someone on Fiverr.com who could do that for me. But usually I think that's all it takes. And even if that feels too much, or you just don't want to touch Audacity at all, you could just not have an intro, or you could record your intro, record the main episode, and then just merge them in audio-joiner.com. I don't think that you need music even necessarily. Again, I think it's so much more important that you just do the thing than to get it right. But if you want to check Audacity out, it's free. It works on any kind of computer. And if you have a specific problem, you just kind of have to find out what the name of the problem is. And then you can Google it, and there will definitely be a YouTube video explaining how you can do it. So most of the time, it will be a case of Googling removing background sound in Audacity. I've done that a few times, and it's totally fine. The next step is creating a podcast graphic. I just recommend something that's easy to read even on a small screen, because people will scroll through their feed and see different of these square graphics in iTunes, and you want to be able for them to read the name of your podcast. Then you want to record, edit, and upload your first episode. And then as a final step, you need to register your RSS feed with iTunes and Stitcher or any other platforms that you want to be on. So I think iTunes is probably the biggest. Stitcher is also cool. I want to get my podcasts on Spotify as well. But you could also just begin with the platform that you decided to host on, which could be SoundCloud. So lots of people also have the SoundCloud app and follow me on there. They might never be on iTunes or Stitcher. What I do whenever I've uploaded a new episode into SoundCloud is to take the sharing link and add that to my website into a blog post. So for me, you will see each time I have episode show notes with like the links to everyone. And then at the end of that, it'll be a normal blog post, and then people can play the SoundCloud file directly on my website. I'm going to check on. It's really easy to remove background noise in Audacity. You say that, yeah, it's true. I sometimes find music behind voice really distracting, difficult. Yeah, good point. That's true. That's why I decided to have just one guitar sound, one person playing. Like, I don't like podcasts that have like drums and all these things overwhelming. What is the website where you join it to files? Oh yeah, actually Audiomator is good. I think mine is called audiojoiner.net. It's more important to the thing than to get it right. Yeah. Totally. I mean, that's it. Do you have any more questions on the process of getting your first episode out? Or on like setting the intention and finding a tagline and name and all that? Okay. I want to share a couple more tips for interviewing people and being interviewed. Okay, there's a question. I have a question about blogging. I have different kinds of blog posts, including audios, and I'm not sure whether to separate them out as different categories with different menu links or keep them all in one place. That's a good question. What I would probably do is to have a main blog tab, which has all the different content. And then underneath that, a drop down that separates audio and video or written blog posts. My gut feeling is that I would probably, as a user or like as as your audience, be more excited about navigating your content divided by themes rather than media form, if that makes sense. So I think I would probably rather separate interviews from personal stories or how-to guides or something than deciding first if I hope that makes sense. Now Megan says, I really struggle with content planning in general. Relatable. Any tips for people who aren't schedule planning oriented? Yes. I'm not sure if you listened to my last workshop, which was more about content long-term strategy. I shared an Excel sheet in there that people can copy over into their own file. And I think, so I hear you don't want to do hardcore planning, but I think it might be helpful to experiment and play with that a little bit. So one thing, for example, that some people find helpful is to identify the different kinds of posts that they want to create without necessarily scheduling them or planning them into the future. So for example, if you were someone who is a herbalist and you're thinking about 5 different kinds of posts that you want to create for Instagram, you could say, I am creating recipes, stories from my garden, reviews or testimonials I've received. I'm going to create plant profiles and product highlights. Then maybe you won't necessarily like plan your month out, but you will have created a container for yourself so that when you're in the creative energy of like wanting to write something in the moment, you can come to that sheet and be like, okay, I have this starting point and this container. So yeah, that might be good. Yes. And then Eleanor says, yeah, it's more about the topic than the medium type. And I think it can also be both, like depending on how many different categories and media types you have. You could also have a drop down of 5 different options of like interviews, stories, essays, audio, written, so that people can navigate that in whatever way they want. Archetype profiles, yes. That's really helpful. Thanks. Great, cool. Okay, so keep the questions coming. I will talk a little bit more about being interviewed. I think this is also almost the last slide. So I think something that could be helpful is to create a media page with your short bio, your podcast blurb, and info on what you're looking for in conversations if you want to invite someone. I have one, so if I'm approaching someone now and I'm like, hey, would you like to be on this podcast? I send them to this page. It kind of lists my latest episodes, and there's also a booking link. And it's just, I think the idea is just to make it as easy as possible. You don't want to email someone and for them to then need to research and Google you and find the podcast and then be like, like what would this person want to be asking me? I think you want to provide all this information and make it as easy as possible for them to say yes and get organized around that. And I think really there's no need to be apologetic about reaching out to the first few people. I think that's for some people a barrier. And what I've seen for many people is that they will maybe like record the first 5 interviews and say, okay, this podcast hasn't launched yet, but I'm planning a beautiful series and I would like you to be part of that. And I don't have anything to show you right now, but I promise I'm creating a beautiful container and I would love you to be part of that conversation. Like, I think obviously some people are busy, some people have different priorities, but my experiences with approaching people have been so positive. I've received very few notes so far, which is really great. And then I would say invite people to book through Calendar, either using Acuity or Calendly. I'm pretty sure if you don't want to take payments, you can use a free version, but it's just about avoiding this like emailing back and forth with people. If you can just say, this is my calendar, book yourself in whenever you can. It's also easier with different time zones. They can just like click their time zone at the top and it will display in the time zone that they're in. I always email questions in advance and invite people to promote. You might not, this is again, like just depending on what kind of conversations you find easy. I find it comforting to have like a rough outline of the questions that I'm going to ask. Some people are just like, this is generally my kind of conversation style, and within that we'll just see what happens. I think that's also fine, but I think questions in advance is comforting for people. And then I'm inviting people actively to promote whatever it is that they're offering. To be honest, I'm sometimes a bit irritated when people that host podcasts don't link to people's websites at all, because I feel like, hey, this person has really given you some time and some of their wisdom, and we all kind of have small businesses. And I'm like actually really wanting people to share as well. It's also like about resisting competition. Like obviously I have a lot of people on my podcast that do similar things to me, but I really want to be in the spirit of like people will choose whatever is right for them, and I don't want to like be stingy with the sharing and connecting and linking up. So I think that's really something good to express right away in the moment that you're interviewing people or inviting to the interview. Let them know that you're happy to promote their offerings as well. And then if you are thinking about pitching the podcast that you want to be interviewed on, again, I think it might help to have a media page. Even if this is your very first interview, it might be good to have a media page with your short bio and a headshot, because that's something people will need for their show notes anyway. And then think about highlights in your story that you can pitch and communicate shared audience or intention. So if, for example, you haven't done any interviews yet, you can say, I believe we have a shared audience because XYZ, or I think we have a similar intention because I also really care about helping people with learning about plants, for example. So I think it's about creating that connection and communicating why you think you're a good fit for the podcast. And highlights in your story, if you look at my media pages, you'll see a section. So it has my short bio, headshot, then it has my previous presentations or like appearances, I think the last 8. And then underneath it has a section that says things I love talking about. And these are just like random things about me, such as I got married to myself. I love talking about alternative ways of doing business. And it's just like stuff that as a media producer, you can easily pick up and be like, oh, actually, that's something I would really like to expand on with that person. Okay, final slide. Oh no, there's two more. I'm so sorry. So obviously if you have to leave, that's totally cool. You'll get the replay, you can watch the rest. I'm just gonna keep going for like 10 more minutes, I think. Just a quick overview of ways in which you can promote your blog or podcast. I think it's a helpful to map out your steps in an Excel sheet. So for me, that's like posting on social media, sending a newsletter, maybe adding some stories on Instagram as well. I also like to keep track of the interviews that I've given and the people that I have reached out to. So again, I have an Excel sheet for everything, and I'm just tracking who I got in touch with, what the status of that interview is, if we have already scheduled or I'm waiting on them or whatever. I add all new publications to my media page usually, and then I'm promoting them on my own channels as well. So I'm scheduling that in. I think that's also like just a courtesy. If you've been interviewed somewhere, you need to make sure that you're promoting that episode or blog post or whatever in your own channels as well. And then if you're creating a blog post or podcast, ask people at the end to share or review if they like it. So on iTunes, for example, the more reviews you have, the more you'll be shown to people that listen to similar podcasts. It's actually really important to invite people actively to review and share your content if they like it. Which is awkward at first, but I think we need to remember that we're creating something for free and people can share that, you know. I want to touch super briefly on SEO for podcast. First, I want to recap what SEO is. The idea here is that you want to set your content up in a way that makes it easier for people to find it. And ideally for people who are interested in what you're having to offer. So I, for example, am not interested in all kinds of traffic on web design. Like I don't want people to find me necessarily who will web design, because they could be looking for all kinds of things. They maybe want to train as a web designer, or they want like really boring corporate websites. So this is not relevant to me. I want to be really specifically let people find me that are cool, like me, you know, or like that are in my audience. I also, so any search platform, it could be Google, but it could also be the iTunes app that lets people search for podcasts, is looking for three different things. First is relevance to the keyword that people are putting in. The second one is popularity, so how many listens or how much blog traffic you already have. And the third one is just repeatability. This is more about security and whether you're not you have spam on your site, so that's less relevant. So really being relevant and popular is what's most important to most search engines. I also think that good content actually is way more important than keyword spam. So even if you identify wanting to rank really highly for something like herbalism, adding the word herbalism 100 times into your content is not going to be helping you in any way, because your content is not going to be of quality enough, and search engines increasingly become really intelligent, so they will know this is just spam and you're not going to rank highly. Weaving in keywords can be really helpful in letting folks find you though, especially if they're specific. So for example, I'm really into the idea of embodied tarot. So this is a keyword I sometimes use in my podcast titles, and I do notice that makes a difference, and it gets more people that are really into that kind of stuff to the podcast. If you're kind of like a little bit vague on what kind of keywords would even work for you, using the Instagram Explore function is really helpful. So in Instagram, you go on the Explore tab, and then in the top, you type in the most popular keywords. So if you're herbalist, again, silly example, you write in herbalism, and it will list underneath a long list of related keywords that may be more specific. So this could be folk herbalism or clinical herbalism. And it will give you an idea for what people are looking for. And then you can also click on one of them and see what people share, and think about whether that's something that you feel is connected to your content or your intention. And then regardless of what platform you're deciding to blog or podcast on, research the SEO functionality for your blog. There's so many tips out there. So for example, if you're going with Squarespace, Google SEO optimization for Squarespace, and just see what people recommend. That should be really helpful. Whew, I'm through the presentation now. Just checking. Thank you. Just checking on the chat box again. I have like 5 more minutes. If you have more questions, let me know how this was and if you're feeling excited. at least 2 different pages for potential interviews and potential interviews. I have 2 different pages. It could be one though. So I have one that's like more about the podcast. This is how you book. And then I have one that's more about my own media or like what I've been interviewed for. Yeah. I'm excited, but also overwhelmed. Great. I'm a bit overwhelmed too, but I'm also really excited. Like, if there's 5 people in this room right now who are gonna maybe start a podcast this year, that would be amazing. And then there's more people watching the replay. So, yeah, let's all create podcasts. Any other questions? This is good. I'm getting a clear picture of what my categories are. Awesome. Great. So the next workshop in 2 weeks is going to be on telling stories. I'm excited for that one. I think this is going to clarify a lot around how we can tease out ideas of story that's interesting, and we're also going to expand on privacy and intimacy and on all those kinds of things. And then the one after that, 2 weeks later, is about getting organized and loving spreadsheets. So I'm going to share more of my spreadsheets, and you can copy them. For the last one, I've also shared a Google Doc that people can share, and gave me so much joy that actually people copied it over in their own document. I was like, spreading the spreadsheet love everywhere. Cool. Thank you guys. It was great to see you. Have a beautiful day. Bye.